Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State Podcast, brought to you by the Michigan Brewers Guild, celebrating 25 years of camaraderie. The Great Beer State Podcast shares the stories of our member breweries and the rich community of Michigan beer and brewing. Listen in, have a beer, and then check out mibeer.com for a full listing of member breweries, events, and more opportunities to explore and support the Great Beer State. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State Podcast. I'm Fred here with Scott. We're getting right into it. We're in episode 4 here of season 3. We've got an interview from 2022, pretty much the here and now, with Russel Springsteen of Right Brain Brewery. Another historic voice, I'd say. So we're looking forward to introducing Russel and getting into that. In the meantime, we're gearing up for Spring Beer Festival. Scott, what's the latest?
Yeah, we continue to make plans for that new event, which is requiring a little more effort on a few fronts to kind of figure out how the breweries are going to be laid out and how we're going to get things in and out of the festival. But looking forward to seeing people in Traverse City and getting this finally underway after 2 years of trying and not having a festival. We're excited to have one this year.
Yeah, on May 7th, the snow should be cleared and we should be ready to go. Maybe the sun will be out.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a little before swimming season, but it should be past the snow shovels. Let's hope.
Yeah, I think so. So we've got the beer festival coming up, the Spring Beer Festival in Traverse City. And we just continue to be working on sharing some fun promotion for our 25th anniversary celebration, including some things in July that will culminate with the Summer Beer Festival. We've got breweries planning collaboration beers as kind of a celebration. We're designing a new unique pint glass for the second year of a pint glass promotion. So those are fun things that people can look forward to this summer to help kind of enjoy and celebrate July as Michigan Beer Month and our 25th anniversary.
Yeah, and as part of the Share Your Voice campaign, we're asking people to give shout outs to the people of the Michigan brewing community, sharing what you love about it, wishing a happy anniversary, but also sharing a little story about how it's intersected with your life. And that invitation goes out to enthusiasts, beer fans. It goes out to brewing industry members, both Michigan and everywhere. And we're also inviting community leaders. So if you're if you're involved in leading your community in some civic way, and breweries have had a significant impact on your community, we'd love to hear from you. So you can go to the website mibeer.com and look for the Share Your Voice section and upload video, audio, or other.
Yeah. I guess one other thing that I would note, coming up in May, on May 20th, is the Protect Michigan Craft Beer Pack golf outing. This is the second year that fundraiser has been in effect, and it's a fun time to go out and, if you're a golfer, see a few people, drink a couple of beers, and the proceeds from that go to support the Protect Michigan Craft Beer Pack that tries to support legislators that are like-minded with other folks in our industry.
Right on. So we've also got a brewer's dozen here. We're going to continue our alphabetical trip around the member roles of the Michigan Brewers Guild. Scott, you want to kick us off here? We're into the B's.
Yeah, we're heavy into the B's, and we'll start in deep down in Southwest Michigan in New Buffalo and Beer Church Brewing Company. So hopefully if you hear some of these breweries and you hadn't heard of it, didn't know they were around, we encourage you to plan a trip and go to them and visit them. It's our way to promote more breweries than just what's featured in the podcast. But anyway, Beer Church Brewing Company in New Buffalo. Yeah,
and one most people are familiar with. They may not have been to this one. My alma mater, Bell's Brewery in Comstock.
And of course, Bell's Brewery has their long-standing eccentric cafe and general store, and their brewery there in Kalamazoo.
And one I have not been to is Bearded Lamb Brewing Company in Plymouth.
So Bearded Lamb is brand new. They're just joining the Brewers Guild, and they've just gotten open here in the last few months. In Comstock Park, home of the Winter Beer Festival, there is Beer Distillery that's been making beer and distilled spirits for a few years now.
And we're in a little run here of BIER breweries. Next up is Beer Camp. Beer Distillery is spelled that way, and so is Beer Camp in Ann Arbor.
And a slightly different take on it is Beer de Mac Brew Works in Mackinac City.
And one more in the stretch is Beers Inwood Brewery in Charlevoix.
Yeah, that's quite a stretch of the BIER beers.
We're
Now, a lot of those
international.
are tied with last names of folks. Anyway, there's a brew pub in Lowell called Big Boiler Brewing Company.
And your alma mater, we got Big Buck Brewery in Gaylord.
Yes, indeed. And Big Heart Brewing Company in Hart.
We've got Big Lake Brewing in Holland, Michigan.
And anybody that was in the Kalamazoo area seeking out specialty beers many years ago would be familiar with Big T, now Brew Pub, but Big T Brew Pub added a brewing operation to their long-standing bar and restaurant in Lawton.
Right on. So that is our Brewers Dozen. Check them out. There's new breweries popping up. There's still first breweries moving into towns and cities, which I find exciting, as well as, more historic locations or multiple locations. So I find that to be, and as we're doing this work on the 25th anniversary and continuing interviews and I don't know, looking through the member lists and all that stuff, I find I can get excited by both. Like, wow, there's 5 breweries in this town. That's pretty cool. And I also still get really excited when I see a town get their first brewery. It's just something about it. So both are happening. So Russel Springsteen, Right Brain Brewery. He's a longtime member of the community. He's also been active despite sometimes being a small operation, which is a little harder to get around to all the things. I feel like he's been a presence in the guild events and conversations and fabric for a long time. I can't quite remember when I first ran into him so long ago.
I can remember first meeting Russ, but I can't remember how long ago it was. And like you said, he's been around for a long time, and like almost every story of a brewery that's been around for quite a while, it's one of these great stories of determination and perseverance and driving things through. And I just saw Russ recently when I was in Traverse City planning for the upcoming Spring Beer Festival, and he said things are going great, really feeling good about things. So it is nice to get a real positive report. And I really picked up on a few things that I didn't know, but I really appreciated Russ's conversation about, the time and thoughtfulness he put into planning and trying to figure out what to do with his brewery after he decided he wanted to open one. And he was doing it at a time when there weren't so many resources as there are today. So I just think that thoughtfulness is, probably really helped him be able to persevere throughout the years later after he opened his brewery.
Yeah, and he shares several of the stories where he's had to, not just persevere through the difficulty of opening a business, but through specific resistance and sort of opposition in a few different ways. So I think it's a compelling story, and it's one that, I don't know, for me, just brings up feelings of pride and also just being grateful that he had the backbone to make it through, as well as his team and family and everybody involved.
Yeah, one other thing that Russ touched on a couple different times in a couple of different ways is what the culture of beer and around beer means to him and meant to him in getting the brewery going, and what it means to him as a business owner, and how he approaches his business and his staff and all the folks that he works with and has worked with.
Yeah. I find two of the significant themes in terms of our startup breweries are a home brewer, um, you know, growing the system and the process up, and having a beer culture often internationally inspired epiphany. And you know, and Russell's got both themes going strong here in his story.
Yeah, he sure does. And if you're not very familiar with Right Brain, and I don't want to pigeonhole them by one beer that they make annually, but if you've never heard of their pig porter, it's got to be one of the more unique, unusual beers. And it's not a catchy name, it's actually descriptive of the beer and what's in it. So
Yeah,
if you haven't tried it, that's a unique one.
yeah. And you know, Russ shares his take on how that came to be, and how he was able to keep it going.
Yep.
So yeah, another really good natured, kind, and generous person in the Michigan brewing community. I'm really glad to bring his story forward and share it with you. So we'll hand you off to Russell. This was an interview taken during the Great Beer State Conference in January 2022 up at Grand Traverse Resort.
Cheers to Russ and Right Brain Brewery.
Cheers. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sitting with us.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate it.
So we've been talking to people about Michigan brewing community, their own businesses and breweries, and kind of how they got into this and what it looks like now. So I'd love to get started just hearing how you ended up being in the beer and brewing business.
My strange journey.
Yeah. When did it get started? When did you first think of it?
So how I got in this business was basically because nobody would bring me into the business. It goes way back to drinking beer back in my teen years, and then having the opportunity to go to Germany, and I was invited to Russel in Germany. And when I got over there, I fell in love with this culture of beer that was centered around beer. And the fact that I didn't have to be in the back 40 hiding and sneaking it, I could sit right at the bar and drink these beers. All the glassware, the pride in, pouring ahead. I once knocked the head off, and Rosie, the bartender, I'll never forget her, she swiped that away. It was a nice Pilsner, it was beautiful. And she said, "Shit beer," and took it and re-poured it, and then taught me to drink that beer, let that foam settle, and there was still beer. I was so amazed by that. I thought that was so impressive, and we didn't have any of that culture back here. When I came back after just 3 weeks there, and then drank domestic beer, it was terrible. Tasted like water, tasted like wet cardboard. Once I've since learned, so that was my first journey into really appreciating beer and the culture of beer and trying to hold on to that. And then when I was 22, I moved out to Boulder, which, Colorado was the center of home brewing and the Brewing Association. My brother-in-law was a home brewer, and he got me involved in home brewing, and I became absolutely obsessed with it, constantly brewing, constantly trying new things. I had all that information there in Boulder. It was amazing to, learn to homebrew there because it was so accessible. I remember moving back to Michigan, and there were 7 breweries here, and I really wanted to be a brewer, and there was no opportunity to brew because I didn't have experience. And so I spent about 7 years researching, digging through equipment, digging through recipes, continuing to homebrew, and trying to find a job in the industry. And the opportunity wasn't there. There were 7 breweries in Michigan, when I came back. And to look at it now is pretty amazing. It was, what, over 400?
What year was that you came back?
Would have been 93. I moved back to Michigan. I was just gone for a year, but in that year, I grew a lot, you know. Then I came back and became obsessed with home brewing. I brewed some good beer and some really nasty beer, and we still drank it. So yeah, really thanks to my brother-in-law who really got me into it, and he'd been home brewing since the early 70s. So that's kind of how, I got into it. And then I'm a barber hairstylist by trade. That was my career. That's where I made my money and made my living. But I just wanted to brew. So I moved to Traverse City, where my wife grew up, in 2000, in the summer of 2000. And I took a sabbatical. I was appraising real estate before that and cutting hair, working 7 days a week, like I still do. But I took a sabbatical, and then my wife told me one day, you gotta get a job. And I applied at John's Barbershop up in Sutton's Bay, and I had applied at Traverse Brewing Company up in Elk Rapids. So I went in there, and they asked me if my ears were burning, because Joe Short, who was brewing there, had just quit and was moving on to his next adventure. And so I took that job and brewed with John Niedermeyer, Jack Archibald, and John Edstrom were the owners at the time. They were great. I think they were, what were they, license number 7 maybe, or something like that at the time. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting, brewing on an old Peter Austin. I had found my dream job, and I never complained about digging out mash or boiling. I became obsessed then with commercial brewing, and I just think back then how hard they did it the hard way, and now our equipment's all automated and we still dig out mash, but so yeah, that was 20 years ago. Chaz was asking me yesterday, and I kept thinking 2007, but I really been around since 2000. I had a break in between there before I opened my own business. So.
And were you already thinking about, did you have aspirations of opening your own business in those early days, or at what point did it seems like there was I found beer culture, I want to homebrew. Then there was feels like a transfer of passion to commercial brewing. At what point did the light go on and say, I really want to open my own place?
When I really couldn't find a job in the industry, and I knew that probably, I never dreamt what would happen today at that time. So I just figured if I was going to do it, I have to do it myself. And so I, kept cutting hair. When I designed my salon and the brewery next to each other, because I knew that I'd have to keep cutting hair to keep an income, because if I opened this brewery, that there probably wouldn't be income to pay myself. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't. But actually there was. I fell in at the right time, before the industry had really exploded. And so, but I'll go back to, I took some advice from a woman, Diane Schellenberger. She was a writer for the Brewers Association. And I originally was looking at doing the U-brew things, where you come in and pour syrup, then come back a couple weeks later and bottle it. So she had told me that that wasn't going to work. That'd be a huge failure. It was working in Canada because their taxation rates were different. And so I had some really nice long conversations with her. She gave me a lot of really good information that I took to heart. She told me that if I was going to do a brewery, do not do food. Don't make it be a restaurant. Focus on the beer, make really good beer, and don't bring food into it, because people will have all the expectations of coming to a restaurant. And if the beer is the greatest and the food's just okay, that's what they're going to review, and that's what people are going to remember. So I did that. I opened up in 2007, 3 months after the crash. I had an investor, my sister invested with me, and I also had my architect at the time invested because no bank would give me a loan. I went to many banks, and a lot of them just handed me the rejection letter right out the door because no way would a salon and a brewery work. That just didn't make sense at all. And so it did work, though. Part of the reason it worked was I was in the right spot at the right time. I was early in the industry and the revival of the industry. So going back to Diane, she told me that this was, and then probably I started getting really serious about it in the early 90s. And she said that you have to wait for the industry to fail and then it'll come back, because right now it's just equity money in the industry. They don't have passion for brewing. They're just going to try to get rich quick running a brew pub restaurant, and to wait for it to fail and then watch these certain signs coming back to be able to buy that equipment back for a dime on the dollar. She was right. It did fail. It took a few years for that. I built a business plan in between then. I saved money. I saved everything. I lived incredibly frugal and saved all my own capital because I knew I wasn't going to get any. So I bought my system used for cheap. In fact, I sold half of the system off back used and almost made all my money back. It was a little 7-barrel from Specific Mechanical. So we put that together. I had opened up in the warehouse district of Traverse City. We're no longer there. Between two existing breweries. Everybody told me I was crazy, that why would I put a brewery between two breweries? And I said, because I'm going to be different. And I think that in the next probably 7 years, we're going to have 10 breweries in Traverse City. And I got laughed at. I think we've got 13 now. It's been 14 years, but kind of watching that evolve. I started off with no smoking before the smoking ban. I had no TVs in there because I wanted to regenerate the art of conversation, sitting around having a pint and having a conversation instead of sitting there staring at a TV screen. So I try to do things a little bit differently. We didn't have a signature beer. Our idea was to brew whatever we want, whenever we want, because we can, which ended up come back to haunt me. So as the industry became more regulated, I learned to hold my tongue a little bit differently. But yeah, just started off brewing tons of different brands. We now have brands, but that was what the consumer told us that they wanted us to keep brewing. And of course, we brewed with a bunch of crazy materials, vegetables, fruits, pig heads.
Yeah.
And so.
Wait, what did you say? Pig head?
Pig heads, yeah. It goes, I've had an interesting run in this industry. I've had to deal with the feds. I know a lot of breweries don't believe that, but yeah, they do come visit your facility, and it's really not a fun afternoon. But I was already being bent over by the TTB about how we purchased. They didn't want us buying off the back 40, and we weren't. We had a purveyor, but we had to prove all that, and they made me go back and redo taxes, and they really interfered with me and slowed me down. At that time, I realized they didn't really understand the questions that they were asking me. But anyway, we got through that, and then our purveyor brought Mongolista pigs in, and they invited these high-end chefs from all over the world, and then they slaughtered this pig, old world style. So they slaughtered this pig. They used 100% of that pig, and then I donated beer for the slaughter, and they invited me to this dinner, and it was all paired with wine. And so I asked why we couldn't do a beer, and so I said, well, I'll bet you I can make a beer with the leftover parts. What are they? And they're like pig head minus the brain and the leg bones. And so we figured that we could smoke those, and then add them to the boil, and mostly novelty and for fun, but we did it. We took it to the Great American Beer Festival. We won a gold medal with experimental on a Saturday. On Monday, the feds called and said they were coming to visit on my wife's birthday of all days.
Huh.
They did. They came in and visited and came through our pub and our brewery and, turned everything upside down and slowed me down for a whole solid day. But with that came a lot of expectations on what we would do and how we would do it. But what they didn't know is I had already put a disc together with our surveyor, and we sat down and talked about the complete development of this beer and filmed it. How we would source this pig, how it would be processed, how it would be smoked, how it would be safe for the consumer is really what they were after. And we had that all figured out, so I just handed him a disc. I don't think he was really impressed because he was mostly there to slow me down. But anyway, that's kind of how the pig beer came from. And now we brew it every year. Once a year we brew it.
So you were brewing
same way.
what you wanted and when you wanted, but the feds had another. I had some questions about that one.
Yeah, I did. I was just trying to what I was just trying to say is I'm small. We're not a big branded brewery, and at that time that we don't have to brew the same beer over and over and over and over. Now we do, but times change.
Yeah.
And so.
Can you tell me a little bit about the creative side and both like the name of the brewery and some of the ideas you've already shared about what you wanted the brewery to become and how that kind of connected with you as an individual and your own personal values?
Yeah, Right Brain Brewery came, the Right Brain came from when I was a senior in high school. I had a creative writing class, and we came into class one day and the teacher told us we were all going to take a test. We couldn't do it right, we couldn't do it wrong. Statistically, 3 or 4 people would be the answer. And then I ended up being the only kid that was right brain, and she told me that I did it wrong after telling me I couldn't. So that kind of stuck in my head. I would remind her that I was right brain. I think we had a personality conflict. So, right, yeah, that kind of always stuck in my head, just the creative part of the brain. I knew that just from marketing, if you're going to go into brewing, you had to have a good marketing plan. You could make the greatest beer in the world, but if people couldn't connect to it for whatever reason, then, it was probably going to go nowhere. So I wanted to be Right Brain Brewery. Living up here, I didn't want to be Peninsula Brewery or Twin Pines, or I wanted marketing to go in any direction that we chose for any reason on a dime. And so with just, brewing a lot of crazy beers that basically came from home brewing, it kind of could take me in any direction. So that's kind of how I came up with the name. And basically the philosophy of just, making fun beer, taking chances.
Yeah, it sounds very fluid. And you talked about that approach being a way to connect with people. How did that go in terms of what was the connection? What, once you sort of put yourself and your ideas and your company out there, your beer out there, what was it like connecting to people, and how has that grown over the years?
The connecting to people goes way back to me being a hairstylist. I had somebody sitting, I was touching them, and they had to trust me. And so you had to build these personal relationships. And I would listen to what they were doing with their lives, and they would ask me, what am I going to do with mine? What are you doing? I'm like, well, I want to be a brewer. I want to start this brewery and a salon. It's going to be called Salon Saloon, and we're going to have a brewery. And I got to interview all of these people, and what I found was women liked beer, but it was always assumed that they didn't. And so I would talk to the women, and they would say, well, when you make the pub and you make the beer, do this. and then the men would have their own opinion, and I basically tried to combine both of those when we opened our first pub and we started brewing our first beers. I've always brewed beer with women in mind. Way back to, and this probably, unfortunately, may sound sexist or it doesn't intend to be, but fruit beers. I brewed raspberry wheat over and over and over because I tried to perfect that beer and to try to appeal to the women market. You know, women are the consumers and they do like beer. And so I tried to brew beer with women in mind, and also my marketing to, you know, be sensitive to not some woman in a bikini running down the beach as a marketing ploy. So I'm probably off on a tangent.
Yeah, that's all right.
I do that. It's my
No, that's
attention
good.
deficit.
That's good. I was just thinking about how that relates and kind of what it felt like to have new customers and salon customers in that space for the first time, when it goes from the hypothetical to here, this is what I've made for you. And that, I felt like you were talking about having this composite of all these ideas shared with all these different people that have been through your salon over the years. So what was the feedback, what was the reception like in those early years? In terms of
From the consumer?
Yeah.
Well, one, I think it was popular because it was so strange that we had a salon and a brewery, and that's right when the economic crash came. So any news outlet was looking for a good story, and it was just an interesting, good story. And so we gained a lot of popularity from that, and statewide customer base, mostly when we started just brewing and not having a flagship. You know, the men and women both gave lots of opinions of what they did like, what they didn't like, why we didn't make that beer again. And so, you know, really I had an opportunity to listen to the consumer. They were telling me what they wanted and didn't want. You can brew all the beer that you like. If the consumer doesn't like it, and you're gonna be drinking a lot of your own beer, period. So, yeah, just trying to listen to people.
And how has, I guess this is a two-parter. How has the makeup of who is in the pub, who's in your brewery? I'm thinking both in terms of staff and customer, but you know, we've been taking a lot more look at the makeup of our community and who's in it. So I just wonder how that's changed over the years in terms of who makes up your audience, what your staff has grown to.
Yeah, thinking about who makes up our audience, you know, I'm always thinking about that. And then being so short-handed, and I had to be the bar manager for the last 6 months, and I hadn't really been behind the bar in probably the last 8 or 10 years. Standing behind the bar, I get to look and see and listen and engage people, the men and the women. I have my 19-year-old daughter as a bartender for us, and she's like, "Dad, there's a lot of old people here." And there are a lot of, well, old to her is 40, so yeah, the couples, lots of couples, older couples that travel throughout the state. They've been to all these different breweries, they've got their little marks, they're talking about where they've been. But really looking at our customer base was really over 40. There's still the younger, we still get some college kids in the early 20s. I also, my observation with young 20s is they're far more responsible in their alcohol consumption than my age group was at that age. You know, if we got pulled over in the old days, we got a lecture and got sent home. If you get pulled over and you're drinking now, you're going to jail. So, you know, those times have changed. So we don't have a lot of younger people. When we do have them, they drink their beer very carefully. They don't pound them. The older people still pound. So it's interesting. it's an interesting observation. Who, you know, I'm in a tourist town, so it's interesting seeing our tourists come through. Traverse City's changing dramatically. There's a lot of people moving from the coasts right now. We're the highest demographic of a zip code from East and West Coast. So there's new customers with different expectations of what they're doing out in Portland as to what we're doing here in Michigan or in Traverse City. So interesting listening to those people. You can learn a lot by just listening.
Yeah. When you think back to Rosie and her invitation to look at beer as culture, how does that show up in your worldview as a brewery owner and what we're doing here these days?
Say that again.
So-
So thinking about Rosie.
Rosie
Yeah.
invited you to look at beer as culture.
Sure.
Or beer culture, and you came back thinking differently about what beer meant and how you could participate in it, right? So when you think about that early inspiration and you compare it to how we're doing now as a community, what's changed since then, and what would you say to Rosie if you could show her right brain in the Michigan beer and
Man, if I could have Rosie sit down on the other side of the bar and I could pour her a beer, I'd pour her an IPA. Because they wouldn't have that, you know?
Yeah.
I might even pour her a pig porter because there's no way she would have been able there to drink a pig porter. Looking back at the culture that we have now, especially the American culture, where we have huge taste values, and look at all the, you know, the culinary scene. So this beer is part of that culinary food scene with all the different flavors, mouthfeels. You know, there's a lot of texture in beer. So, and it'd be watching our culture really change and drink really crazy big beers, especially the IPAs. It still boggles my mind. You know, how.
And what do you feel like why is that important? What does having great breweries making interesting beer, contributing to the culinary scene and our culture, what does that do for us as human beings? What's the importance of it?
The importance of having this scene is probably comes down to happiness and enjoyment of life. You know, you can't live on crackers alone. You gotta be able to spread something on that cracker.
Yeah.
Or put a nice piece of cheese on it, or pair with it. I think it just, having somewhat of happiness of, you know, experiencing life, food, flavors.
Yeah. And then when you talk about community, you talked about they laughed at you when you thought Traverse City could have 10 brewers, and we've exceeded that. We're over 400 breweries in the state. What's either the hallmark of the Michigan community, or again, the importance of coming together as a community, as a guild? What does that look like to you now with all your years in?
Yeah, well, the brew community. I have met great friends that just aren't brewer friends. They've just become my friends. Somebody I can pick up the phone and talk to for, you know, a mental health reason or whatever. Just a good community of people. My head brewer Josh today just looked across at lunch and said, "This is an interesting kind of off group, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, we're a little bit off center, but we're really core good human beings, generally, you know." So, and I've had my ups and downs with some people in this industry. Part of it's my own personality or theirs, or us just rubbing. But for the most part, I have a great camaraderie with a whole vast group of different people. We've done lots of collaboration brews, and we're looking forward to going back and doing that. I think of just sharing information. When we do a collaboration, my rule is a hold nothing back. if you ask me a question, I'm going to honestly answer you and give you my experiences. Your experiences, I would hope that you would do the same for us, but we've learned different cleaning techniques, we've learned different mashing techniques, you think you know so much because you've been doing it for a while, and you really don't, man, until you have some brethren in there that can say, have you thought about this? Have you tried this? Have you ever had this happen? Yeah, I have. I have no idea how to fix it. And so, it doesn't come down to brewing. How about glycol? You know, glycol is the scourge of my life. My next life, I'm going to come back as a mechanical engineer and specifically deal with glycol.
That sounds like punishment.
Yeah, it is. I've had to learn a lot of things, you know. You learn a lot of things as being a brewery owner. It's not just brewing beer. Yeah, you learn a lot about mechanicals, managing money, managing people. That's the hardest, is managing people. How to build a culture in your brewery. You know, your culture, and I had to learn that the culture isn't me. I can be a leader, but the culture are the people that are there doing it every day. They're ones getting sweaty and getting cold. It's been fun watching my culture evolve through the years. I've had some really great brewers work for me. They've moved on to do other things or have other experiences, and I'm happy for them to do that. But I think of, you know, I've really had some nice relationships with some of my employees. As an employer, it's been really difficult to have some of these friendships because there's got to be boundaries, and it took me a while to learn those boundaries. But most people will respect it if they're passionate about their job and the culture that they're creating.
Well, thank you for putting your passion into the world and into our brewing community. I think it's a better place for having you and Right Brain in it.
I appreciate that.
I just appreciate
fun.
you being part of the family.
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride. I'm finally having fun again. You know, sometimes it's just hard, and so get through the hard, and then know that there's fun on the other side of that door. So keep plugging.
Yeah.
Make good beer, drink good beer, and be nice.
There you go. I love it.
I'd like to hear more about your reasons to push forward on the idiocy of a salon/brewery. People had to have had good reasons why that was a dumb idea, and you said, "Fuck it, I'm doing it anyway." And I'd like to hear the here's why I pushed forward on that anyway, despite lots of naysayers.
Sure. Why did I push through on my original having a salon and a brewery? Even though people told me it wouldn't work, for all reasons, people lined up to tell me how I would fail, and I'm pretty stubborn. So if you tell me I can't do something, I want to figure out a way to do it, period. Right or wrong, hopefully I'm the right, but that was really inspiring to me, just mostly people telling me that I couldn't do it. Also, you know, rejections. It's part of life. Keep fighting through. Some of it was with liquor control. You know, when I was cutting hair and I had this concept, and I was telling my investigator, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm doing it. And you could just see they're like, what? Because I hadn't dealt with it. Although there was a salon who was giving away beer at the time, or doing it, which wasn't really illegal, but the way they were doing it, they couldn't do it. But I knew that if I was an alcohol producer,
A different salon was without.
It was a
connection to
different
beer.
salon in the state,
Yeah.
and so the state had come in and shut them down and said, you cannot do that. You don't have a license. You cannot be doing that. Whereas I did, and I had a whole plan, and it hadn't been done yet. So it wasn't that it was right or wrong or legal or illegal. There just was no regulation for it. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting at the beginning, getting phone calls from Teresa Whitehead, at the time was the director of liquor control, and her saying, Russ, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And I was very frank about how I was doing it. until the city police came in one day and said, "Stop doing that." And I said, "I'm not doing anything wrong, illegal." And they said, "We know. Just, you almost got all your licensing. Just stop doing what you're doing and then continue it through. When you open your doors with the brewery opens, you're only, a couple months away at most. Please just do this because we would really appreciate that." And I did what they asked, even though I wasn't really doing anything wrong, because I found a loophole.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time looking for loopholes, probably more than I should, but there's always loopholes.
Yeah, you provided some challenges for the left brains of regulation.
Yeah, but regulation's been interesting. It's been good, and fighting through and powering through. Liquor control has come to me before, and there was a time when I moved from one building to the other, and I was being told by liquor control that this is the easiest thing you're going to do. You're going to close down on a Thursday and reopen in your new spot on Friday. We're just going to transfer a license. And then I was getting ready to close my building. I'm out of my old spot, coming in my new spot. There's huge challenges. And then one day she called me and said, "We got a problem." I'm like, "What's the problem?" She's like, "They changed the law and you got to start all over." And I'm like, "No, I just am transferring." And she said, "No, you got to start over." I said, "Start over where?" And she said, "At the beginning." I had to go through all the city approval, all of the federal approval, and all the state approval again. I got to do it twice. Had I known that the first time, my record keeping and how I managed and moved money would have been a hell of a lot tighter, but it wasn't. And, in their defense, they weren't picking on me. I just got to be the lucky draw of being that first person back through. However, they worked with me. They expedited my license. And then the city kept me out. Not actually the city, it was my county building code kept me down for an entire summer while I made that move. I was down from Memorial Day to Labor Day in 2013. Liquor control, when we lobbied, they actually approached my brother and said, "What's going on? What's happening up there? How can we help you?" And he's like, "I don't know." So they wanted me to call them. Last thing you want to deal, I don't want to deal with liquor control. There's this huge stigma of fear and power. My experience has not been that. They've always been easy to communicate with, and especially that they were reaching out telling me that, "Hey man, we need you back. We need your revenues. We need you as a Michigan brewery to be strong." Traverse City Sleeping Bear was the most beautiful place on earth that summer. And I had ads in the back of American Airlines. They put me in there. I didn't ask for that. I had all this publicity and things rolling, and then I was out of business. But yet liquor control came to me and to help me. I don't know where I was going with that, but
It's really important. Hard to hear. Where I was thinking about wrapping too was, so your story includes lots of hard. You talk about making it through the hard and that knowing there's fun on the other side, and the moves and the regulation and the challenges and just the concept. There's a lot of hard, and knowing you for a long time and hearing you, I can really hear the grit and determination. But so I just think wrapping up, what drives you or what makes it worth it to get through the hard? Like,
what drives me
what's the
to
nugget
get
that makes it all
through
worthwhile?
is basically fear of failure. I don't want to fail. I've been on the brink of bankruptcy. I've been on the brink of complete failure. I somehow powered through it or got lucky, or I've gotten lucky. Got an account. I got a contract brew that kind of really helped me, and just it came out of nowhere. Gave me the cash flow that I needed. I went through to merge to be acquired. That failed. It was a huge failure. It financially set me back big time. That brought on the failure, which then brought on a bank calling my notes, which I've never missed a payment in my life. I've been late twice, but not that late. And to have your note called that can push you into foreclosure, that fear of laying awake, being angry, trying to work through the anger. You can't always be angry. There's not a lot of good energy that comes from that, although, you know, it has to happen. But fear of failure, mostly. And really what my wife and my children have been through in the last 14 or 15 years of this business hasn't been all rosy. I mean, I work 7 days a week. And so, yeah, fear of failure, that's what keeps pushing me on. But that's why I said, you get through that failure, you get through those downtimes, and then it comes up and you step in and all of a sudden the sun's shining and things are good. Be happy when things are good. And life isn't always about being easy. So, yeah, power through.
Well, thanks for your work. And like I said, I think world's a better place since you do make it through. And
I appreciate
exists.
that. Let's have fun again.
I would just say that I get what you're saying, and I don't know if you even have a response, or is this just me mouthing off, but fear of failure is usually characterized by resistance to taking risks, and that ain't what I just heard for 30 minutes.
No, yeah.
You,
I'm a risk taker.
You might feel like it was feel of failure that pushed you through, but what I heard was someone who constantly dared failure to come after them. And that's the people that make it through. You might have some anxiety about failure, but you're doing it.
That's one of my many.
Someone who definitely is not afraid of failing.
Yeah, no, and in the beginning, you know, when people said it wouldn't work or whatever, they're like, oh, you're just a big risk taker. And I really wasn't I was a calculated risk taker. That's what I would tell people. You were taking a risk, but I had already researched angles on it. And, you know, I kind of knew what I was getting into to take those risks. Risk is part of life.
Well, and your
failure is
risks,
part of it too.
Yeah, and I feel like it gets around that those are things you believed in, that you believed should exist.
Yeah.
And so your willingness to take the risk is so that it has a chance, and the fear of failure is sort of protecting that you want to protect that from the forces that would take it down. So it is engaged with risk if you believe in it. Like I
you
feel
gotta
like,
believe in it. You believe, I believe in it.
right? I mean,
But it was my passion. I wanted to do this.
Right.
I chose to do it.
because there's nothing in the market that said, hey, we should do this saloon idea. That was an idea that you had belief in, and then
It was also necessity.
had to will it
So-
into existence.
Yeah, you do things that you don't want to do to achieve the things that you do want to do.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, watching, and sharing Michigan's Great Beer State podcast, supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. Interviews featured here have been included in the book A Rising Tide, Stories of the Michigan Brewers Guild. They'll also be in the Great Beer State documentary coming out in July of 2022. Visit mibeer.com for brewery information, beer festivals, and 25th anniversary celebrations. We appreciate the support and encourage you to like, subscribe, and give us a review. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer. Cheers.